The world had shrunk to the skeletal fingers of fir trees and the bone-aching cold that gnawed through our wool coats. We weren't a squad anymore, not really. We were 6 ghosts haunting the Ardens, the last remnants of Paladin III, cut off and chewed up somewhere northwest of Bastogne. The constant, distant thunder of artillery was the forest's heartbeat, a reminder that a bigger, more conventional hell was still raging just beyond our personal one. "Anything, Finch?" I whispered, my breath pluming into a white cloud that was instantly snatched away by the wind. Corporal Leland Finch didn't look up from the snow. He was a whisper of a man himself, a shadow from the Appalachian hills who could read the forest floor like a newspaper. He brushed a gloved finger over a depression in the snow, his face as still and grim as the frozen earth. "Fallschirmjäger," he said, his voice a low burr. "Paratroopers. At least a squad. Fresh sign, Sergeant. They're on our asses and they're good." I cursed under my breath. Not Wehrmacht grunts, but German paratroopers. The best hunters the Krauts had. It meant they weren't just stumbling after us, they were tracking us with purpose. "How long till they're on us?" asked Silas Hatcher, his voice a low rumble from behind the bulk of his Browning automatic rifle. The bar was our heaviest piece of ordnance, and he treated it like a demanding child, constantly complaining about its 19 pounds of dead weight, yet cradling it with a lover's care. He'd just finished wiping the action with a gasoline-dampened rag, a winter trick to keep the mechanism from seizing in the sub-zero temperatures. "An hour, maybe less," Finch answered, finally rising to his feet. "They're moving fast, not trying to be quiet. They know we're tired." He was right. We were running on fumes and cold rations. My stomach was a tight, empty knot. I looked at my men. Hatcher, the big Texan, looking solid and dependable behind his gun. Quentin Devereaux, the new kid from Louisiana, was trying to hide the trembling in his hands. His first real taste of combat had left him with a shallow graze on his forearm, and our medic, Corbin Shaw, was just finishing the bandage. Shaw, a technician 5th grade, was a cynical Bostonian who'd been pulled out of medical school. He worked with an efficient, detached precision, his movements economical in the biting cold. I could see the chevrons on his sleeve, 3 stripes below a capital T. "He'll live, Sarge," Shaw said, not looking at me. "But if this gets infected out here, he'll wish he hadn't." "Heard that, Doc?" Devereaux mumbled, his Cajun accent thick. He was trying for bravado, but his eyes were wide and skittish. Judd Calhoun, a farm boy from Ohio, said nothing at all. He just stared into the trees, his M1 Garand held tight against his chest, his face a mask of weary resignation. He'd been quiet ever since we'd lost the rest of our section in the breakout. "All right, listen up," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the cold-induced haze. "We're not making for the main lines. They'll have pickets and kill zones waiting for us. We're going deeper. We'll swing wide, use the woods for cover, and try to come in on their flank from the north. Maps are shit, and the radio's a lost cause." I tapped the useless SCR-30 on my back. Its antenna had been sheared off by a piece of shrapnel hours ago, rendering it just more dead weight. "From now on, Finch is our eyes. We move on his word." Hatcher grunted. "Deeper into this frozen shithole, just beautiful." "You got a better idea, Silas?" I countered. He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the snow. "Nope. Just bitching. It's what I do best, besides shooting this pig." He patted the bar's stock. We moved out, a staggered column of exhausted men. Finch took point, moving with a silent grace that belied the heavy gear he carried. I was behind him, then Devereaux and Calhoun, with Shaw and Hatcher pulling rear security. Every snap of a frozen twig underfoot sounded like a rifle shot. The trees pressed in, their snow-laden branches blocking out what little light filtered through the gray, oppressive sky. The cold was a physical presence, a predator that stalked us just as surely as the Germans. It stiffened our trigger fingers and stole the warmth from our blood. We'd been moving for what felt like an eternity when Finch suddenly dropped to one knee, raising a fist, the signal for contact. We melted into the trees, hearts pounding against our ribs. I crept up beside him, my Colt M1911 already in my hand. He pointed through a gap in the pines. About 60 yards ahead, two figures in German gray were moving cautiously, the vanguard of the hunting party. "Two only," Finch breathed. "Let them pass." I weighed the options. Let them pass, and the main body would be on us in minutes. Take them out, and we risk a prolonged firefight. No, I decided. We take them, fast and quiet. Hatcher, you're on overwatch. Suppress if it goes loud. Finch, with me. My order was a gamble. It was a violation of the very idea of a tactical retreat, but being hunted was a slow death. It was time to bite back. We moved like wraiths, circling around a small, snow-covered ridge to get on their flank. The crunch of my boots was deafening in my own ears. I could see them clearly now. Young faces, pink from the cold, their Kar 98K rifles held at the ready. They were professionals, their eyes constantly scanning the woods, but we were better. We were 20 yards away when one of them stopped, his head cocked as if he'd heard something. Maybe the wind, maybe the frantic beat of my own heart. It didn't matter. I rose from my crouch. "Now!" I hissed. My first shot from the Colt took the nearest German in the chest. He went down without a sound. Finch's M1 carbine cracked twice, and the second paratrooper crumpled, his helmet rolling into a snowdrift. It was over in 3 seconds, but 3 seconds was too long. From further back in the woods, a German voice shouted a question. It was immediately followed by the distinctive ripping sound of an MP-40 opening up, spraying bullets blindly in our direction. "Break contact!" I yelled, already scrambling back. "Hatcher, give 'em hell!" The deep thudding report of Hatcher's bar answered me, chewing up the trees where the muzzle flashes had come from. It was the sound of authority, a roaring promise of death that made the Germans pause. That was all the time we needed. We fell back, running low and fast, the hiss of incoming rounds slicing the air around us. We ran for a solid 10 minutes before I called a halt, collapsing behind a thick fallen log. The men were gasping for air, their chests heaving. We'd gotten away, but the message was clear. The Germans were right behind us and they weren't giving up. The sky was darkening, the gray turning to a deep, bruised purple. Snow began to fall, thick, wet flakes that clung to our helmets and shoulders. "We dig in here for the night, Sarge?" Devereaux asked, his voice shaking. I looked at the exhausted faces around me. Standard doctrine said yes. Dig in, set watches, try to rest. But these weren't standard issue hunters on our tail. They'd use the night to surround us. "No," I said, the decision forming like ice in my gut. "We move, right now. The snow will cover our tracks. We use the darkness. We don't stop till dawn." A collective groan went through the men, a sound of pure misery. But no one argued. They knew I was right. In the Ardens, in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge, the only thing worse than a stupid order was no order at all. We were going to walk all night, into the frozen black heart of the forest, hoping to outrun the devils we knew, never imagining the ones we were walking toward. The night march was a unique kind of torture. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion, the screaming muscles, or the relentless cold that felt like it was turning our bones to glass. It was a mental grind. Every shadow was a German soldier. Every gust of wind through the pines sounded like a whisper. The darkness was absolute, a thick, smothering blanket that swallowed sound and sight. We moved by touch and instinct, a hand on the shoulder of the man in front, following Finch's spectral form as he guided us through the black. Sometime after midnight, when the cold had sunk so deep I could no longer feel my toes, I called a halt. The men collapsed where they stood, too tired to even complain. We were in a small, dense copse of trees, the snow falling so heavily it created a curtain of white around us. 10 minutes, I rasped, my throat raw. Drink some water. Keep it in your coat so it doesn't freeze. We huddled together for warmth, a miserable knot of shivering men. The only sound was our own ragged breathing and the soft hiss of the falling snow. And then we heard it. It came from behind us, from the direction we'd come, from where the German paratroopers should have been. It started with a single panicked shout in German. Then the unmistakable chatter of an MP-40, firing a full magazine in one long, uncontrolled burst. It was answered by the crack of several Kar 98K rifles, a volley of panicked, unaimed shots. Then came the screaming. I've heard men scream before. I've heard screams of pain, of anger, of fear. This was none of those. This was a sound I'd never heard from a human throat. It was a high, keening shriek of pure animal terror, the sound a rabbit might make in the jaws of a fox. It was a sound that scraped at the base of your skull. More gunfire erupted, wild and useless. Another scream joined the first, then was abruptly cut off with a wet, gurgling choke. Hatcher shifted beside me, the weight of the bar a comforting presence. "Sounds like they ran into one of our patrols," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Giving 'em what for?" I shook my head, though he couldn't see it in the dark. "No, that's not a firefight, that's a slaughter. They're not shooting at anything, they're just shooting." The chaos lasted for maybe 3 minutes. A final, desperate volley of rifle fire. Another one of those soul-shredding screams that ended with a sickening crunch. And then, silence. A silence that was heavier, more profound than before. The kind of silence that presses in on your eardrums. No moans from the wounded, no follow-up shots, no voices. Just the whisper of the snow. We stayed there frozen for what felt like an hour. No one spoke. The fear in our small circle was a tangible thing colder than the air. The devils behind us had apparently met a bigger devil. "What the hell was that, Sergeant?" Devereaux finally whispered, his voice trembling so hard his teeth chattered. "I don't know," I said honestly. And that was the most terrifying part. We didn't move until the first hint of gray dawn bled through the trees. The snow had stopped, blanketing the forest in a pristine, undisturbed layer of white. It was beautiful and unnerving. "Finch," I said, my voice hoarse, "I need you to go back. See what happened. Don't engage anything. Just look." Finch's face was pale in the dim light, but he nodded without hesitation. He checked his carbine, slung it over his shoulder, and melted into the trees, leaving no more trace than a passing breeze. The wait was agonizing. We formed a small circular perimeter, our backs to each other. Hatcher had his bar bipod deployed, its muzzle pointed down the back trail. Shaw was checking his medical kit, his hands moving out of nervous habit. I scanned the woods, my eyes burning from exhaustion and strain. Every tree, looked like a lurking figure. The silence stretched my nerves to the breaking point. Finch was gone for nearly an hour. When he returned, he wasn't moving with his usual stealth. He was crashing through the underbrush, his face the color of old parchment. He didn't say a word, just jerked his head for us to follow. His eyes held a horror I'd never seen in them before. Not in Normandy. Not anywhere. He led us back along our own tracks for about half a mile. The scene he brought us to was set in a small clearing. It looked like a butcher's shop had exploded. German bodies, or pieces of them, were strewn across the snow. The pristine white was stained with huge, grotesque splashes of crimson and darker, frozen pools of black. A leg and a paratrooper boot lay by a tree. A torso, ripped open from sternum to navel, steamed faintly in the cold morning air. Their weapons were scattered everywhere, some still clutched in frozen, severed hands. This wasn't a battle. This was a feeding. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Devereaux breathed, crossing himself and stumbling back. He turned and retched into a snowbank. I forced myself to walk forward to assess, to understand. Hatcher let out a low whistle. "Artillery? A direct hit from a big one?" "No," Shaw said, his voice strangely clinical as he knelt beside a mangled corpse. He was all medic now, the horror pushed down by professional curiosity. "Look at the wounds. There's no shrapnel, no burn patterns. This is tearing. The tissue is shredded. Rib cages are cracked open like nutshells. This one's spine is snapped in 3 places." He pointed a gloved finger at the deep, parallel gouges in the man's flak vest. "And look at this. These marks are on all of them. Whatever did this had claws, big ones." My eyes followed his gesture, and then I saw what he meant. The trees, the frozen ground, the bodies themselves were covered in deep scratches, as if a giant animal had raked its claws across everything in a frenzy. It was Finch who pointed to the ground. "The tracks, Sarge." I looked down. Mingled with the German boot prints were other tracks. They were canine, vaguely wolf-like, but the size was impossible. Each paw print was as large as my spread hand, pressed a good 4 inches into the compacted snow. The stride was immense, easily 7 or 8 feet between prints. No wolf I had ever heard of grew that large. We stood there in the silent, blood-soaked clearing, a cold dread seeping into our bones that had nothing to do with the temperature. Our pursuers were dead. We were, for the moment, safe from the Germans, but we had stumbled out of a human war and into something else. Something ancient and primal that had been woken up in these dark woods. I looked back the way we came, then forward into the deeper, uncharted forest. Behind us lay this charnel house, and the thing that had made it. Ahead lay the unknown. It was a choice between 2 hells. "Sergeant?" Hatcher asked, his voice quiet for once. "What's the play?" The answer felt like swallowing broken glass, but it was the only one that made sense. "Forward," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "Whatever that thing is, it solved our German problem. We're not sticking around to become its next meal." I turned my back on the carnage and started walking. One by one, the others fell in behind me. We were no longer just soldiers fighting a war. We were prey, and we were moving deeper into the monster's hunting grounds. The sun, a pale, indifferent disk in the sky, did little to burn away the chill of the morning's discovery. It did even less for the fear that now clung to us like a second skin. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too long. Every gust of wind sounded like heavy breathing. We marched with a new kind of urgency, no longer just fleeing Germans, but running from a nightmare made real. The image of those torn bodies was burned into my mind. By late afternoon, we were all running on empty. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a deep, gnawing exhaustion. I found a shallow basin, a depression in the forest floor thick with ancient pines that offered some protection from the wind, and called a halt. "We camp here," I announced. "No fire. The smoke could draw anything, German or otherwise." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all. Otherwise. The men set about their tasks with a grim, silent efficiency. We weren't a cohesive unit anymore. We were a collection of frayed nerves. I watched them, my own anxiety a cold weight in my gut. Hatcher cleared a field of fire for his bar, his movements jerky with repressed energy. Devereaux, the kid from the bayou, kept casting frantic glances into the darkening woods, his M1 Garand clutched so tight his knuckles were white. Shaw methodically checked our meager supply of bandages and sulfa powder, his face a mask of detached cynicism. Finch, quiet as ever, was the most unnerving. He just stood there, his head tilted, listening to the forest with an intensity that made the hair on my arm stand up. "I don't like this, Sarge," he said softly, his voice barely disturbing the air. "The woods, they're too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. It's like everything is holding its breath." "We're all holding our breath, Corporal," I replied. "Get some rest if you can." I set the watch myself. 2-man posts, 1-hour shifts. It was a risk with only 6 of us, leaving the perimeter thin, but I needed everyone to be as alert as possible. First watch went to Hatcher and poor Judd Calhoun. Hatcher, with his big gun and bigger attitude, seemed to steady the quiet farm boy. The second watch would be Finch and Devereaux. Shaw and I would take the last watch before dawn. We ate our K-rations cold, the frozen crackers and canned pork tasting like cardboard and fear. No one spoke. The only sounds were the chattering of teeth and the whisper of the wind through the high branches. Darkness fell like a hammer, absolute and suffocating. I tried to sleep, but my eyes wouldn't stay shut. Every time I drifted off, I saw claws and blood-stained snow. I lay there, listening to the pounding of my own heart, feeling the collective tension of the men around me. This was worse than waiting for an artillery barrage. With artillery, you knew the rules. You knew what it could do. This was an enemy we couldn't comprehend. An hour crawled by, then another. I heard the quiet shuffle of men changing posts. It was Finch and Devereaux's turn. I saw their silhouettes move to the edge of our small hollow. The silence deepened. It was a predatory silence full of unseen teeth. Finch, with his hunter's ears, was the first to sense it. I saw him stiffen, his head turning slowly. "Sarge!" he hissed, the sound sharp and urgent. But it was too late. The attack came from the one direction we hadn't been watching closely enough, the position Hatcher and Calhoun had just vacated. It was a blur of motion, a surge of profound darkness against the lesser dark of the night. There was no growl, no roar, not even the sound of snapping twigs, just an impossible, silent speed. It was on Calhoun before he could even raise his rifle. We heard a single, short, choked-off cry, a sound of surprise and agony cut brutally short. It was followed by the wet, tearing sound of thick wool and flesh. "Contact!" Hatcher bellowed, scrambling to his feet and bringing the bar around. He opened fire, a long, hammering burst of 30, 06 rounds that lit up the clearing in strobing flashes of orange. In that fractured, terrifying light, I saw it. It was huge, far larger than any wolf, with shoulders as broad as a man's. Its fur was the color of charcoal and matted with something dark. For a split second, its head turned toward the muzzle flashes, and I saw eyes that glowed with a faint predatory luminescence. It had Calhoun in its massive jaws, shaking him like a dog with a rat, the boy's limbs flailing limply. Then it was gone. It didn't run. It vanished back into the blackness, taking Calhoun with it. The only thing left behind was the echo of Hatcher's gunfire and a spreading dark stain on the snow. "Cease fire!" I roared, tackling Hatcher and shoving the hot barrel of his bar toward the ground. "You'll give away our position to every kraut in the Ardens." "It had him, Sarge. It had Judd," Hatcher yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and horror. He was shaking, not from the cold but from pure, undiluted shock. He'd been standing right there just minutes before. The discipline held barely. The shooting stopped. We were plunged back into darkness and a ringing silence. Devereaux was hyperventilating, making soft, whimpering sounds. Shaw had his trench knife out, his face a pale, grim oval in the gloom. I grabbed a flashlight from my pack and, shielding the beam with my hand, swept it low across the ground. A few drops of blood. The distinct, massive paw prints leading away into the trees. And Calhoun's helmet lying on its side, a dark, deep dent in its steel shell. There was no body. No trail of dragging. The creature had carried him off as if he weighed nothing. The fragile composure of my squad shattered. "He's gone," Devereaux sobbed, rocking back and forth. Oh God, it just took him." Hatcher slammed his fist into a tree trunk, a raw sound of pain and frustration. "I was right there," he choked out, his voice thick with guilt. "I was supposed to be watching. I should have seen it. I should have—" "Enough," I snapped, my voice harder than I intended. "It's not your fault, Silas. It's no one's fault. It's on me. I picked the camp." The words tasted like ash. I had to regain control, or we would all fall apart right here. The fear was different now. It wasn't the abstract dread of an unknown monster anymore. It was personal. It had a face, glowing eyes, and it had taken one of our own. It had killed him not as a soldier, but as prey. We weren't in a war. We were on a menu. "Pack it up," I said, my voice low and steady, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "We're moving, now." "Move where, Sarge?" Shaw asked, his cynicism finally cracked, revealing the raw fear beneath. "It's pitch black. We'll walk off a cliff." "I don't care," I said, kicking snow over the bloodstain as if I could erase what had just happened. "We are not staying here. We are not waiting for that thing to come back for seconds. We walk until we see the sun. We walk until our legs give out. We walk." No one argued. The fear of staying put had finally become greater than the fear of moving. We abandoned the hollow, a place that would be forever haunted by Calhoun's last, stolen breath, and plunged back into the merciless, hungry dark. The rest of the night was a blur of stumbling, directionless motion. Fear was our fuel. We didn't march. We fled. All attempts at stealth were abandoned. We crashed through undergrowth, slid down icy slopes, and waded through snowdrifts with a frantic energy born of pure terror. The memory of the attack, of Calhoun's abbreviated scream, and the sight of that hulking shadow was a spur at our backs. Every tree was the creature, poised to strike. Every patch of darkness was its hiding place. When the sun finally rose, it brought no relief, only the ability to see how truly lost and exhausted we were. We were 5 now. The empty space where Calhoun should have been was a physical, aching void in our formation. It was Finch who brought us to a halt. He had been ranging ahead, casting back and forth like a nervous hound, when he stopped and knelt. "Sarge, look at this," he called out, his voice hushed. I came up beside him. He was pointing at the creature's tracks. We had been trying to move perpendicular to its trail, but in the dark, we'd circled back. The huge wolf-like prints were here again, pressed deep into the snow. But something was wrong. Intersecting them, sometimes even overlapping them, were other tracks. The distinct waffle pattern of German jackboots and, stranger still, the wide, unmistakable tracks of a vehicle. A truck or a half-track. What the hell is a truck doing this deep in the forest? Hatcher wondered aloud, leaning on his bar. And why are its tracks mixing with the creatures? Shaw added, his brow furrowed. It makes no sense. It was a question with no immediate answer. But the presence of vehicle tracks meant a road, or at least a clearing. It meant a destination. Driven by a desperate need for shelter, any shelter, I made a decision. "We follow them," I said. "The vehicle tracks, not the creatures. Let's see where they lead." We followed the trail for another hour, the trees gradually thinning out. Finally, we broke through onto a large, man-made clearing, and in the center of it stood a building. It was a large, 2-story structure built of dark timber and stone, designed to look like a rustic hunting lodge or a forestry station. But the illusion of civilian life was shattered by the details. A sagging, cut-apart perimeter of barbed wire encircled the clearing. A sandbagged machine gun nest, its MG-42 long gone, stood sentinel near the tree line, half buried in snow. This was no hunting lodge. This was a military installation, and it had been abandoned in a hurry. "Krauts!" Hatcher spat. "Looks like they cleared out." "Or something cleared them out," Finch murmured, his eyes scanning the building. The place radiated a profound sense of wrongness. The front door, a heavy oak affair, had been torn from its hinges and lay splintered on the porch. Windows on both floors were shattered, not from the outside in, but from the inside out, shards of glass littering the snowbanks below. "I don't like this, Sarge," Devereaux said, his voice a nervous squeak. "Neither do I replied. "But it's better than freezing to death in the open. Finch, with me. The rest of you, cover us from the tree line. If anything so much as twitches, open up." Finch and I moved across the open ground, our weapons up, scanning every dark window. The silence was absolute. We reached the porch, stepping over the ruined door and into the main room. The inside was a scene of utter chaos. Heavy furniture was overturned, chairs smashed to kindling. Papers were scattered everywhere, swirling in the draft from the broken windows. The floor was sticky in places with huge, dark patches of dried blood. But the most disturbing feature was the walls. Deep, powerful claw marks were gouged into the plaster, some tearing straight through to the brickwork beneath. They were the same marks we'd seen on the German paratroopers. "What happened here?" Finch whispered, his eyes wide. "A fight," I said. "A bad one." But it was what wasn't there that was most unsettling. There were spent brass casings, German 9mm and 7.92, littered across the floor. There was blood. There was wreckage. But there were no bodies. Not a single one. It was as if a hurricane of violence had swept through the building and carried everyone away. This had to be a rear echelon base, I thought aloud, trying to piece it together. The Krauts must have figured this place would stay 100 miles behind the line forever. Then they rolled the dice on this offensive, and the front came right to their doorstep. They weren't prepared for this. "Prepared for what, Sarge?" Shaw asked, as he and the others cautiously entered, their eyes taking in the carnage. "A GI assault?" "I don't think so," I said, pointing to the claw marks. "I think they weren't prepared for their own guard dog to get off its leash." This place was connected to the creature. I was sure of it. The tracks led here. The destruction matched its handiwork. This wasn't just some random forest monster. It had a source, and that source was right here. "All right," I said, my mind shifting from survivor to investigator. "We need to know what this place is. We're a target out in the open. Inside, we have cover. We search this building, top to bottom. Hatcher, you and Devereaux take the second floor. Shaw, you're with me on the ground floor. Finch, I want you to see if you can find a basement or any other way in or out. Look for documents, radios, maps, survivors, anything that tells us what the hell we've walked into. And be careful. Whatever did this could still be here." The men nodded, their fear now tempered by a grim sense of purpose. We had stumbled into the monster's lair. The only way we were getting out of these woods alive was to understand what we were facing. We split up, the sound of our boots crunching on broken glass echoing in the dead, silent house. The ground floor was a maze of wrecked offices and common rooms. We moved through them methodically, our weapons at the ready. In a room that looked like a commander's office, I found a map of the Ardens region tacked to a wall. A red circle was drawn around our current location with the words, "Sicherheit Zone Alpha," Security Zone Alpha, written beside it. This place was important. It was Finch who found the real prize. "Sarge, in here." His voice echoed from a small pantry off the main hall. Shaw and I joined him. Behind a false wall of shelving, he'd found a heavy steel-reinforced door, the kind you see on a bunker. It was slightly ajar, unlocked in the panic. I pushed it open, and a wave of cold, sterile air washed over us, tinged with the metallic scent of old blood and chemicals. A set of concrete stairs led down into the darkness. "Basement," I said. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting a nervous path down the steps. "Let's go. Stay sharp." The basement was another world. This wasn't a cellar for storing wine. It was a state-of-the-art laboratory. Stainless steel tables, shattered beakers, and complex machinery I didn't recognize lay in disarray. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. But it was the fixtures along the far wall that made my blood run cold. There were 3 large cages, built not of wire but of thick welded steel rebar, the kind of cages you'd use to hold a grizzly bear. 2 were empty. The third was twisted and broken, the bars bent outward as if by some titanic, explosive force. On the floor in front of it was a thick, leather and steel collar, snapped in 2. "My God," Shaw breathed, his medical curiosity overriding his fear. What were they keeping down here? "The answer to all our problems," Finch said quietly. He was standing in front of a heavy metal filing cabinet that had miraculously survived the destruction. Its lock had been smashed. He pulled open a drawer. "Sarge, you need to see this." The drawer was full of files, each stamped with the double lightning bolt insignia of the SS and the word Geheim, secret. On the top folder, a single ominous title was typed, Project Lycaon. "Lycaon?" Devereaux asked from the top of the stairs where he and Hatcher had joined us. "What's that mean?" "It's a name from Greek mythology," Shaw answered, his voice distant. He picked up a file, his German surprisingly decent from his university studies. "A king who served a human sacrifice to the gods and was cursed by Zeus turned into a wolf." My gut clenched. I took the main project file from Finch. It was thick with scientific reports, anatomical diagrams, and daily logs. Shaw and I began to piece the nightmare together, reading passages aloud while the others stood guard, their eyes scanning the dark corners of the lab. The project was run by the Ahnenerbe, the SS Occult Research Division. Years ago, their archaeological teams had excavated an ancient Teutonic burial site deep in this forest. In it, they found the remarkably well-preserved remains of what the local legends called a Blutkrieger, a blood warrior, a berserker. The legends claimed these warriors could channel the spirit of the wolf in battle, granting them inhuman strength and savagery. Most scientists would have dismissed it as folklore. The Ahnenerbe took it literally. They extracted something from the mummy's bone marrow, what the files called a dormant retroviral agent, a primal genetic key. They believed it was the source of the berserker legend. Their goal was predictable and monstrous: to weaponize it, to create a new breed of super soldier for the Reich. Project Lycaon. The first trials on wolves and bears were catastrophic failures, resulting in uncontrollably violent mutations that quickly died. Then they moved on to human subjects, Russian prisoners of war, political dissidents, army convicts. The results were just as gruesome. Most subjects died in agony as their bodies tore themselves apart. But one subject, designated Alpha, survived. The file described him as a disgraced S-Sturmbannführer, a major, sentenced to death for insubordination. He was strong, resilient, and possessed what the researchers chillingly called a high affinity for primal aggression. The virus didn't kill him. It bonded with him. It transformed him. The reports chronicled his changes: accelerated healing, heightened senses, and, under controlled stimuli, a full physical transformation into a creature of immense power and ferocity. Our creature. They had been keeping it sedated, studying it, trying to figure out how to control it, how to replicate the results. It was held in that reinforced cage. I flipped to the last page in the main laboratory logbook. The entry was dated just a few days ago. The handwriting was a frantic, barely legible scrawl. December 16. Allied artillery barrage hit the main power line. Backup generators are failing. The cryostasis system is offline. Alpha's sedation is wearing off. He's waking up. We can hear him. The final entry was just a few hours later, written by a different, shakier hand. Generators failed. Isolation protocol compromised. Alpha has breached the cage. God im Himmel, Hilfunds. God in heaven, help us. There was a final, spidery trail of ink leading off the page, as if the writer had been dragged away from the desk. We were silent. The air in the lab was thick with the weight of the revelation. The monster in the woods wasn't some ancient demon. It was man-made. A Nazi experiment gone horribly wrong. The thing that had hunted us, that had torn Calhoun apart, was born in this very room. As the truth settled over us, a new sound reached my ears. A low, scraping noise from the far side of the lab. Behind a bank of destroyed machinery was another heavy steel door, larger and older than the one at the top of the stairs. It was bolted from this side, but something was pushing against it from the other. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the thick metal. "The crypt," Shaw whispered, his face ashen as he pointed to a diagram in the file. "The original excavation site. It's connected to the lab. The records say they sealed it off." The growling grew louder, more insistent. It was in there. It had returned to its nest. I slammed the file shut. "Hatcher Devro, block that door! Pile everything you can find against it!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the horrified paralysis. "We know what it is now, and we know where it is." Just as they started scrambling to obey, a new sound shattered the subterranean quiet. A sharp, urgent whistle from outside. Finch had left one man on watch at the tree line. Then the sound of engines, truck engines, and the high-revving whine of a lighter armored vehicle. Finch scrambled halfway up the stairs. "Sarge, we've got company. 2 Opel trucks and an armored car. SS markings. They're deploying, surrounding the house." I stared from the barricaded crypt door to the stairs leading up to the firefight that was about to begin. The creators had come back for their monster, and we were trapped right in the middle. "Get to cover!" I yelled, the command ripping from my throat. "They're not here to talk." The illusion of sanctuary, however grim, was shattered. We scrambled up the concrete stairs, leaving the cold dark of the lab behind, and burst back into the wrecked main hall. Through the shattered windows, I could see them. Figures in the distinctive black wool coats of the SS fanned out from the vehicles, moving with a chilling professional speed. These weren't regular army. Their movements were too precise, too aggressive. This was a cleanup crew. Hatcher immediately set up his bar near a large window overlooking the approach, shoving a splintered table in front of him for cover. "Got the bastards in my sights, Sarge." "Hold your fire," I ordered. "Let them get closer. Every bullet has to count." Devereaux took a position near another window, his knuckles white on his garand. Shaw, the medic, laid out his meager supplies behind the solid stone base of the fireplace, ready to do his work. Finch was a ghost, moving from window to window, his eyes tracking the enemy's deployment. "They're moving like they own the place," Finch reported in a low voice. "They think it's empty, or that the only thing in here is their pet." The SS officer, a lean man in a peaked cap, shouted orders in harsh, guttural German. They weren't preparing for a siege, they were initiating an assault. They assumed whatever resistance was left inside was feral and disorganized. They were about to be proven fatally wrong. When the first fire team was 30 yards from the front porch, I gave the order. "Light 'em up." The world exploded in sound. Hatcher's bar opened up with its deafening rhythmic roar, a stream of 30, 06 rounds tearing into the SS squad. The lead man was stitched across the chest and thrown backward as if by an invisible fist. The man next to him went down screaming, his leg shredded. My M1 Garand kicked against my shoulder as I drew a bead on an NCO and squeezed the trigger. The distinctive ping of the ejecting en-bloc clip followed a moment later. From my right, Devereaux was firing, a steady, methodical rhythm. The disciplined fusillade from our windows caught the SS completely by surprise. They dove for cover behind their trucks and the snow-covered trees, returning fire with their MP-40S and STG-44S bullets ripped through the walls of the lodge, sending splinters of wood flying. Glass from the few remaining panes of a high window shattered and rained down. The SS were professionals. Pinned down, they immediately set up a base of fire. From behind one of the Opel Blitz trucks, the sound of an MG-42, Hitler's buzzsaw, tore the air, its incredible rate of fire sending a hail of lead chewing through the front of the house. "Stay down," I yelled, hugging the floor as a stream of tracer rounds passed inches over my head. We were badly outgunned and outnumbered. They had automatic weapons, grenades, and a goddamn armored car. The SD.KFC. 222, which had been holding back, now rolled forward, its 20mm cannon swiveling toward our position. "They're trying to flank us. Right side," Finch called out. I crawled to a window on the east wall and peered out. A squad of 4 SS troopers was using the armored car as cover, sprinting toward the side of the house. "Hatcher, right flank!" Silas cursed, dragging the heavy bar across the floor and setting up at a new window. He let loose a long burst, forcing the flanking team to hit the dirt. But it was a temporary fix. They were squeezing us, tightening the noose. We couldn't hold the ground floor for long. The 20 mm cannon on the armored car would turn this whole building into splinters.
"Fall back,"
I ordered. "Back to the lab, move." It was a desperate gambit. We were trading the relatively open ground floor for a concrete bunker with only one exit. We were trapping ourselves. But it was also a choke point. They couldn't bring their heavy weapons to bear down there. We scrambled from our positions, firing as we went, and piled down the narrow concrete stairs. Hatcher went last, laying down a final burst of suppressing fire before clambering down and pulling the heavy steel door almost shut, leaving it open just a crack. We were plunged into the cold, chemical-smelling darkness of the basement, our hearts pounding, our ears ringing from the gunfire. Above us, we could hear the heavy boots of the SS troopers storming the ground floor, shouting commands. The sharp crack of the 20 mm cannon firing into the building shook dust from the ceiling. And then a new sound joined the fray. It came from outside, from the deep woods behind the house. It started low and rose into a full-throated, blood-freezing howl of pure, unadulterated fury. It was the sound we had heard in the forest, the sound that had preceded the slaughter of the German paratroopers. The creature, attracted by the noise, the gunfire, the scent of blood, it had come back. The shouting from upstairs changed in tone. Commands turned into panicked yells. The disciplined fire of the German machine guns became frantic, uncontrolled bursts. Then we heard the same sound we'd heard in the woods, a man's scream, high-pitched and full of animal terror, cut short by a wet, crunching sound. A new wave of screams erupted from outside, followed by the sound of tearing metal and shattering bone. The beast was tearing through the SS cordon from the rear. The hunters had become the hunted. The firefight upstairs devolved into pure chaos. The SS were now fighting a war on two fronts, against us in the basement, and against the monster that was savaging their comrades outside. It gave us a reprieve, a moment to breathe in the dark. It was in that momentary lull, with the sounds of slaughter echoing from above, that we heard a new voice. Not from upstairs, but from within the lab itself. A weak, terrified voice, speaking broken English from behind a locked supply closet we had overlooked in our initial search. "Do not shoot!" the voice pleaded, muffled by the door.
"Please, I can help you!"
For a second, nobody moved. The plea was so unexpected, so surreal in the midst of the chaos, that it stunned us into silence. Upstairs, the symphony of destruction continued, the methodical carnage of the creature punctuated by the panicked, sporadic bursts of SS machine gun fire. "In there," Finch whispered, pointing his carbine at a metal locker in the darkest corner of the lab. I motioned for Hatcher to cover the stairs. Shaw, with me. We moved toward the closet, our boots crunching on broken glass. "Who's in there?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. "My name is Dr. Alaric Kleist," the voice stammered from within. I was a biologist on this project. Please, they will kill me. The SS. And that thing. A scientist. One of the men who built this monster. My first instinct was to leave him there to rot. But his next words caught my attention. "I know its weakness. I know how you can kill it." That changed everything. I looked at Shaw, who gave a slight nod. I gestured to the lock. "Stand back from the door," I called out. Shaw raised his boot and slammed it into the handle. The lock, already damaged, gave way with a screech of tortured metal. The door swung open, and a man stumbled out, blinking in the beam of my flashlight. He was thin, probably in his late 40s, with wild, terrified eyes, and a face smudged with dirt and blood. He wore civilian clothes, a tweed jacket and trousers that were hopelessly out of place in this concrete tomb. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed him by the front of his jacket, slammed him against the wall, and pressed the muzzle of my Colt under his chin. The cold steel made him flinch. "You've got 10 seconds to convince me not to splatter your brains all over this wall," I hissed. "Start talking. Weakness, now." "Silver," he gasped, spittle flying from his lips. "Argentum, the old legends. We thought them mere superstition, but the bioanalysis proved them true. Its cellular structure, the retroviral agent we used, it has a catastrophic reaction to colloidal silver. It doesn't just wound it, it triggers a systemic necrotic shock. The cells literally dissolve. It is the only thing that will reliably put it down." I stared into his eyes, searching for a lie. All I saw was the stark, raving terror of a man who had seen his worst nightmares come to life. Upstairs, a fresh wave of screaming told me the creature was still busy with the SS. "You're telling me we need a silver bullet to kill a werewolf?" Hatcher scoffed from the stairs. "You've been in that closet too long, Doc."
It is not a werewolf.
Kleist shrieked, his voice rising in hysteria.
It is a genetically engineered weapon platform exhibiting traits mythologically associated with lycanthropy. But the principle holds. The silver acts as a catalyst for total cellular breakdown.
I eased the pressure of the pistol, but didn't lower it. "All right, let's say I believe you. Where do we get silver bullets in the middle of the goddamn Ardens?" A flicker of something, not hope, but a desperate, calculating cunning, entered Kleist's eyes. "We made a contingency. Forgive me, a weapon. For an emergency. The project overseer, a man of theatrical tastes, insisted on it. It was delivered just before the breakout. We never had a chance to use it. It is in the weapons locker, in the small armory, through that door." He pointed a trembling finger at a small, steel-plated door next to the broken cage. This was it. A chance. Not just to survive, but to fight back. To hunt the hunter. "Show me," I said, shoving him toward the door. "Finch Devereaux with us. Hatcher, you keep an eye on that stairwell. If one of those black-suited bastards shows his face, you send him to hell." "My pleasure, Sarge," Hatcher grunted, settling in behind his bar. Kleist fumbled with a key he produced from his pocket, his hand shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to get it into the lock. The armory was small, more of a reinforced vault. Inside, racks held a few standard Kar 98K rifles and MP40S, but on a felt-lined rack of its own was the weapon he'd spoken of. It was a Luftwaffe M30 drilling, a triple shotgun rifle combination gun, typically issued to pilots for survival. It had 2 12-gauge shotgun barrels side by side, and a single rifle barrel underneath. It was a beautiful, deadly-looking piece of engineering. Next to it on a shelf was a wooden box. Kleist flipped the latches and opened it. Inside, nestled in green felt, were 2 types of ammunition. One was a box of brass 12-gauge shells, their tops crimped in a star pattern. The other was a smaller box of rifle cartridges, larger than our own 30, 06.
"Here," Kleist said, picking up one of the rifle rounds. The projectile was a dull, heavy gray. The rifle barrel is chambered for 9 3x74R. This is a Silberkern Geschoss, a silver core bullet, not pure silver, that would be too soft for the rifling. It is a bimetallic core, a tungsten steel penetrator encapsulated in a jacket of nearly pure consecrated silver. Made by a special Waffen-SS Institute in Berlin for field trials. He then picked up one of the shotgun shells. "And these, 12-gauge buckshot. Each pellet is silver-plated. Less effective for a killing blow, but at close range, the spread will cause immense pain and tissue damage. It will slow it down." I took the drilling from the rack. It felt heavy, solid, and purposeful in my hands. I looked from the gun to my men. I saw the fear in their eyes, but something else was there now too, a flicker of resolve. We had been prey for too long.
"All right, Doc," I said to Kleist, my voice cold and hard. "You've bought yourself some time." I turned to my squad. "Listen up. The plan has changed. We're no longer retreating. We're no longer hiding. We're going hunting." The sounds of the battle above were beginning to die down. The screams had stopped. The gunfire had sputtered out. There was only the sound of something heavy, dragging something else across the wooden floor. The creature had finished its appetizer, and we were the main course. The relative silence from upstairs was more terrifying than the noise. It meant the SS cleanup crew had been cleaned out. It meant we were alone with the monster. The only sounds were a low, guttural growl from the floor above, and a wet, rhythmic tearing noise. It was feeding. "It will be sated for a time," Kleist whispered, his face pale. "But the hunger is insatiable. It will come for us next." There was no time to waste. I held the drilling, the weight of it a cold, hard reality in my hands. This wasn't a military weapon I'd trained with my whole life. This was something else. A gunsmith's masterpiece, built for a very specific, terrible purpose. "Talk me through this thing, Doc," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Fast." Kleist, spurred by the proximity of his own mortality, became a surprisingly effective instructor. "The selector is on the tang," he explained, pointing with a trembling finger. "Push it forward. It selects the rifle barrel. To the right shotgun barrel. To the left, the left. The front trigger fires the selected barrel. It is simple, yes?" I worked the selector switch. It clicked into place with satisfying German precision. I broke open the action. The barrels were clean, oiled. I took one of the heavy 9.3 rifle cartridges, the Silberkern Geschoss, and thumbed it into the lower chamber. Then I loaded both 12-gauge barrels with the silver-plated buckshot. I snapped it shut. It was ready. "Now for the plan," I said, turning to the 4 remaining men of my squad. Their faces were grim in the flickering beam of my flashlight, a circle of ghosts in a concrete tomb. "This is not going to be a battle of attrition. We have exactly one chance to get this right. We have to lure it in, pin it down, and I have to get a clean shot with that rifle round. The buckshot is for emergencies only, to slow it down if it gets too close." I looked at each of them. Hatcher, his jaw set, clutching his bar. Shaw, the cynical medic, now looking at the drilling with a kind of grim awe. Devereaux, the kid who seemed to have burned through his fear and come out the other side into a state of numb resolve. And Finch, quiet, watchful Finch. "We need bait," I said, hating the word as soon as it left my mouth. "We need to draw it into the main lab area. It's the biggest open space down here. Hatcher, I want you and the bar up on that maintenance catwalk." I pointed to a narrow metal walkway that ran along one wall, about 10 feet up. "When it comes in, you open up. Don't worry about hurting it. According to the doc, you can't. Just pour it on. The noise, the impact, it should disorient it, force it to keep its head down. That's my window." "And the bait?" Shaw asked, his voice flat. Before I could answer, Finch stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said. It wasn't a boast or a plea. It was a simple statement of fact. "I'm the fastest, the quietest. I can lead it here." I looked at him, the quiet man from the mountains, who could read the forest like a book. He was right. If anyone could play matador with this beast and live, It was him. "You make a sound at the far end of the building up on the ground floor," I instructed, my voice tight. "Get its attention. Lead it back here down the stairs. Once it's in the lab, you break for cover behind that bank of machinery. Don't try to be a hero. Your job is just to get it in the room." Finch nodded once, his expression unreadable. I turned to the others. "Devereaux, you're with me. M1 Garand. You're my personal security. If it breaks through Hatcher's fire and comes for me, you put as many rounds into its head and chest as you can. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Shaw," I said to the medic. "You stay back here with Kleist. If any of us go down, you do your job, and if it looks like we're losing, you know what to do." I glanced meaningfully at his sidearm. Shaw's face was grim, but he nodded. Some fates were worse than a quick death. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's get into position. Finch, give us 2 minutes, then start the party." Hatcher and Finch disappeared up the stairs. Devereaux took up a position behind a sturdy, overturned steel table, creating a small bastion for the two of us. I knelt beside him, resting the drilling on the edge of the table, my cheek pressed against the cold, smooth wood of the stock. I lined up the sights on the entryway at the bottom of the stairs. The only sound was our breathing and the faint, wet tearing from above. We were no longer soldiers fighting a war for territory or ideology. We were cavemen, huddled in the dark, armed with a magic spear, waiting for the saber-tooth to come down into the pit. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with something else, a cold, predatory focus. The hunt was on. The 2 minutes of waiting were the longest of my life. The silence in the lab was absolute, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Above us, the gruesome sounds of the creature's feast had stopped. It was listening, waiting. Then came the sound. From the far end of the ground floor, a single loud crash, as if a heavy piece of furniture had been deliberately overturned. It was Finch. The bait was in the water. A low, guttural snarl echoed from directly above us. The game had begun. We heard the scrape of claws on wood as the creature began to move, its heavy footsteps thudding across the floorboards. It was moving toward the sound Finch had made. Then another crash, closer this time, followed by the sound of sprinting boots. Finch was pulling it toward us. "He's coming," Devereaux whispered, his knuckles white on his Garand. "Steady," I breathed, my eye glued to the sights of the drilling, my finger resting lightly on the front trigger. The rifle barrel was selected. I had one shot. The sounds from upstairs grew louder, a terrifying cat-and-mouse game played out in the dark. A furious roar shook the building, followed by the splintering crash of a wall being smashed through. Finch was pushing it, making it angry, making it reckless. The footsteps thundered toward the stairwell. "Get ready, Hatcher," I whispered into the gloom. A huge, dark shape blotted out the light from the top of the stairs. For a moment, it paused, its massive head silhouetted against the wrecked floor above, sniffing the air. Then it plunged downward, moving with an unnatural, fluid speed. It hit the concrete floor of the lab with a heavy thud and immediately charged toward the center of the room, its glowing eyes fixing on the machinery where Finch had presumably taken cover. "Now, Hatcher!" I roared. From the catwalk above, the bar erupted. A deafening torrent of fire and steel slammed into the creature's back and flank. The bullets, even the heavy .06 slugs, didn't seem to penetrate its thick hide, but the kinetic force was staggering. They punched into it with sledgehammer blows, causing the beast to stumble and roar in fury and pain.
It spun around, its massive, clawed hands raised to shield its face from the onslaught. Hatcher kept the stream of lead focused on its center mass, forcing it to stay put, pinning it in the kill zone. This was my chance. The creature was distracted, its attention focused entirely on the threat from above. It was broadside to me, a perfect target. I took a steadying breath, let half of it out, and centered the rifle's iron sights on its rib cage just behind the shoulder, the place you'd shoot a deer or a bear. I squeezed the trigger. The drilling bucked hard against my shoulder, the 9.3 round leaving the barrel with a deafening crack that was much sharper than the bar's roar. The silver core bullet hit home with a sound like a hammer hitting a side of beef. The creature screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, completely different from its roars of fury. It stumbled sideways, and I could see the wound. It wasn't bleeding red. A thick black, steaming ichor poured from a fist-sized hole in its side. The flesh around the wound was smoking, turning a necrotic gray and dissolving like sugar in water. Kleist was right. The silver was poison, but it wasn't dead. Wounded and enraged beyond all reason, it forgot about Hatcher. It forgot about Finch. It turned its glowing, hate-filled eyes directly on my position. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the lab, it charged. It covered the 30 feet between us in a blur of black fur and claws. It was impossibly fast. "Devereaux!" I yelled, fumbling to break open the drilling, the hot rifle casing ejecting with a hiss. The kid from Louisiana stood his ground. He brought his Garand up and fired, a steady boom, 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 putting 3 rounds into the creature's face and chest. The bullets didn't stop it, but they made it flinch, turning its head just enough. I slammed the action of the drilling shut. My thumb flicked the selector to the right shotgun barrel. I didn't have time to aim. The monster was on top of us. A clawed hand the size of a dinner plate raised to swat me into oblivion. I shoved the barrels of the drilling against its chest and pulled the trigger. The 12-gauge silver-plated buckshot exploded into its torso at point-blank range. The force of the blast threw the creature backward off its feet. It landed in a heap, its body convulsing wildly. The buckshot had torn a huge, ragged crater in its chest, and from that wound, black smoke poured out, smelling of burnt hair and sulfur. The creature tried to rise, one clawed hand scrabbling at the concrete floor. It let out one last long, gurgling howl that slowly died in its throat. Its body went into a final, violent spasm, and then it lay still, the malevolent glow in its eyes fading to black. The lab fell silent. The only sound, the ringing in my ears and the ragged, gasping breaths of my men. It was over. The monster was dead. In the deafening silence that followed, we all just stood there, staring at the massive, steaming corpse on the concrete floor. Its form seemed to be shrinking, the thick muscles contracting, the coarse black fur receding into sagging, pale skin. The transformation was reversing itself in death. Shaw was the first to move. He approached the body cautiously, his medical instincts taking over. He nudged it with his boot, then knelt. "It's dead, Sergeant," he confirmed, his voice hushed with awe. "Whatever it was, it's over." I leaned back against the table, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its place. My hands were shaking. Devereaux was staring at the dead thing, his face a mixture of terror and disbelief. From the catwalk, Hatcher slowly lowered his bar, its barrel smoking in the cold air. Finch emerged from behind the machinery, his face pale but his eyes clear. We had survived. The 5 of us.
My gaze fell on Dr. Kleist, who was huddled by the armory door, looking at the dead creature with a mixture of fear and what looked disturbingly like scientific fascination. "It's not over," I said, my voice raspy. I pushed myself to my feet and picked up the file from the floor. Project Lycaon. "We're taking him, and this." I hefted the drilling M30. "This is our proof." There were no arguments. We knew we couldn't just walk out of these woods and pretend this never happened. We had stumbled into a secret that people would kill to protect. Our only leverage, our only chance of being believed, or at least of not being thrown in a stockade for desertion and raving madness, was Kleist and the evidence. Leaving the lab was like ascending from the tomb. We didn't look back. We scavenged what we could from the dead SS troopers outside. Ammunition, a few grenades, and their rations, which were infinitely better than our own. We found their vehicles, but the keys were gone, and the wiring had been deliberately destroyed. Sabotaged by Kleist, perhaps, before he'd hidden. It didn't matter. We would have to walk. The journey back was a grueling 2-day slog through the frozen wilderness. We moved west, always west, toward the sound of distant artillery, which was now the sound of safety. We took turns guarding Kleist, who was too terrified to try to escape. He knew his best chance of survival was with us. On the third morning, on the verge of total collapse, we stumbled through a patch of woods and saw it. A shallow foxhole, a strand of communication wire, and the face of a young, exhausted American GI, his eyes going wide at the sight of us. He raised his rifle, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought we'd be shot by our own side. "Hold your fire!" I yelled, raising my hands. "We're 101st Airborne. What's your unit?" "Able Company, 505th Parachute Infantry, 82nd Division," he stammered. "Who the hell are you guys? And who's the civilian?" The relief was so overwhelming I almost collapsed. We had made it. We were back among the living. Our reception was a whirlwind of confusion. We were disarmed, given hot coffee and food that tasted like the nectar of the gods, and immediately separated. The story we told of being cut off, fighting Germans, and capturing a high-value scientist was just plausible enough to get us moved back to a regimental command post. That's when the men in the clean uniforms showed up. They weren't regular officers. They wore standard uniforms, but with no unit patches, no rank insignia, nothing to identify them. They moved with a quiet, confident authority that silenced the bustling headquarters. G2, Army Intelligence. They took one look at our prisoner and the file I still carried, and the whole situation changed. We were isolated again, this time not by the enemy, but by our own side. They put us in separate tents, under guard. They questioned us for hours, individually. The same questions over and over. They were polite but implacable. They wanted every detail, every timeline, every bullet fired. Finally, a cold-eyed major brought me into a tent. The Project Lycaon file, the drilling, and the silver core cartridges were laid out on a table. Dr. Kleist was gone. "Staff Sergeant Tate," the major said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You and your men have performed a great service for this army. You successfully engaged and neutralized a high-priority SS extermination squad and rescued a valuable German asset. Your commendations will be noted in your file." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "That is the official story. That is the only story. The events you think you witnessed were the result of combat fatigue, malnutrition, and battlefield stress. The unusual nature of the enemy was a result of experimental stimulants used by SS fanatics. Is that understood?" And Calhoun? I asked, my voice low. What about Private Calhoun? Private Calhoun was tragically killed in action during the engagement with the SS patrol, the major stated, as if reading from a report. A hero's death. He pushed a piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a form. There was nothing to sign. It was just a typed statement about the penalties for discussing classified military operations under the Espionage Act. A court-martial, Leavenworth Prison, a firing squad. We don't need you to sign anything, Sergeant, he said, seeing the look on my face. We just need you to understand. This conversation never happened. That thing in the woods never existed. You will be given a verbal order, under threat of general court-martial, to forget what you saw. You will never speak of it to anyone. Not your commanding officer, not your chaplain, not your family when you get home. It is a secret you will take to your grave. A week later, we were in a rear area replacement depot, the 5 of us. They had split us up, new assignments to different companies, different platoons. We were sitting on a crate, sharing a cigarette, waiting for the trucks that would take us to our new units and back into the war. We didn't talk about the lab or the creature or the silver bullets. We didn't have to. I looked at Finch, Hatcher, Shaw, and Devereaux. In their eyes, I saw the same haunted knowledge that was reflected in my own. We were bound by an unspoken truth, by the memory of a howl in the dark and the impossible thing we had killed in a basement. The Battle of the Bulge might end, the war might be won, but for the survivors of Paladin 3, the Ardens would never truly let us go. Our war with the Germans was almost over. Our war with our memories had just begun.